Hello, welcome to Tending Lilith's Fire. I am Kohenet Matan, and I'm here with my co-host Kohenet Grenn. And we've been away for a little bit, and we're excited to be back. And today we're going to talk about, so what is Lilith's Fire anyway? And when I say we, I mostly mean Devora, because this is really her wheelhouse. And I'm so excited to just say, like, okay, Devora, let me ask you, what is Lilith's Fire anyway?
Well, she's been many things over the years, and it has been many things over the years, going from anger to ruach, spirit, breath, windstorm, force of nature, and she, the archetype and the image, the mythological image, has been representative of justice, of not self-righteous, but other righteous, really anger, righteous rage on behalf of others who had no voice or who cannot speak for themselves because maybe they're in abusive situations and positions of danger. She has represented independence, autonomy, open sexuality, freedom to choose her sexuality without worrying about repercussions, certainly without guilt, and the ability to choose for herself her own course for her life. And so different fires have been ignited in me, I guess, by the work over the years. And I first learned about her actually in '83 when my niece was born. And I had just come back from Israel to meet her and came back to my corporate job in Manhattan and attended a class called Back to the Sources, taught at the Hebrew Union College. And our wonderful professor, who is Ibaye and Zichrono Livracha, Rabbi Zlotowitz, brought her up in the discussion, certainly probably in the Talmudic discussion, the commentary on the Hebrew Bible. And he talked about Lilith and he said who she was, and I was electrified because I'd never heard about such an independent woman in Judaism. I had never heard about her. And several times, many times probably over the years, I've gotten very angry that I didn't know about her when I was a kid, just as I've gotten very frustrated and upset that I never heard of Shekhinah till I was an adult. The female face of God, some would call her, goddess, the divine source of life is how I often would call her myself, or the presence, she who dwells within, she who also gives us fire, and she who also had a relationship with Lilith, by the way. You know that, but the audience may not. So, so Lilith's fire for me is that fire in our belly that, and also the hair that stands up on the back of our neck when our intuition says we're in danger or that something is wrong, something's off balance, something is seriously out of alignment because somebody has just hurt us in some way, disrespected us publicly, shamed us publicly or privately, or again, hurt us in some way. And that can range from psychological to emotional to sexual abuse and assault and so on, and financial and so on and so on. And so she is that fire that I think all women share, but that is often not tapped, not fed, not fueled because the patriarchy is so busy suppressing it and putting out the flames and doing such a good job of it. And by patriarchy, I don't just mean male rule, because women, unfortunately, also support our patriarchal system that runs throughout all our institutions, whether they are religious or corporate.
Can I ask a question? Because you just said that fire is in all women. And I wonder, since we're noticing that patriarchy is upheld by people of all genders, can Lilith's fire not exist in people of all genders as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just don't deal with it as it might exist in men, and it might have a different name, and they might not relate to the term at all. But non-binary folks, absolutely. And yes, of course. That's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Go on.
And so the fire that I had in the when did I go to Israel? I guess it was in the '80s. Was often lit and stoked by my corporate success and my corporate career. But it's a very artificial fire in a way. I mean, we can be creative, we can be successful, but it's not our deepest fire. Let me put it that way. It isn't the one, the mafteach halev, the key to the heart.
Mm.
For me, anyway. That may not be the case for everybody. Certainly, we can be on fire when we're creating, not only artistically but creatively in the workplace, whether even if that is a corporate workplace. But there are also so many mechanisms to stifle spirituality, let's say, and therefore sexuality certainly has to be stifled in the workplace for good reasons, practical reasons. Um, you know, and we're coming up against that now. And I can tell you have a response to
I
that.
just listened to a really great podcast yesterday, Esther Perel on NPR TED, something like that, and she talked about relationships, work in all of its different spaces and the intersections and the separations. So that's very fresh for me. So I'll try and find a link to put in our description for people to go and see why I'm raising my eyebrows at that.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think, the way Audre Lorde defined the erotic as being a fire, a power within us that fuels not just sexuality and sensuality, but our productivity, our creativity, our writing, our arts, yeah, as well as things in the realm of love and lust. All of those things are probably operating as one fire. And it just has to be channeled, I mean, in the workplace, it has to be channeled in ways that are appropriate and expressed in ways that are appropriate. But that spark of life is in us, right? And so I think it also really must vary for different women and for different non-binary folks and for different men, even if they
Different
may,
people.
yeah, different people.
Yeah.
No, but it's interesting to do it, to lay it out the way you posed it, because if I think of it in terms of men, I'm just wondering what would that be called? Certainly, it could be a creative spark. It could be a spark of the erotic. It just might have a different name. Certainly, for a man, if you were to ask a man, then Lilith's fire, and then I think we'd be talking about a broader concept of what fires you up, what gives you your spark of life, your joie de vivre. So.
Maybe, but I also think the experiences of the sacred defy gender boundaries.
Sure.
And sacred fire. So maybe that's a question for you, is like, what's the difference between that sacred righteous fire and Lilith's fire in particular? What is the flavor of it being Lilith that
Yeah.
makes you not want to name it for men?
I think because my work has always been with women, and because I found her so resonant as a positive female archetype for female behavior. That's why. For a woman, for a man to leave home because he was dissatisfied with what was going on and to go in search of a new wife, let's say, and live a free life in the universe isn't questioned the way it is with a woman. He's not demonized for it. And that's one piece. But also, when I first learned about her, I think I had a lot of anger, and so I tapped into her on that level. Here was a woman who got angry about her treatment, about being suppressed by her husband, and against all odds and all permissions, let's say, and all. The society was Garden of Eden, so against all expectations, let's say, of God and maybe an Adam, she left. She just said, I've had enough of this. I'm not submitting to you, sexually or in every other way. We imagined she was also suppressed and dominated by Adam. I'm leaving. That's it. And, so they also call her the first divorcee, the first feminist, but she in reality was showing traits that many women are afraid or not allowed to show, and that many men show are encouraged to show on a daily, regular basis. Anger being one of those, claiming your freedom being another one, certainly, and doing whatever you want sexually, So.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying, like through a feminist lens, that to have this role model, like women need more of these possibility models, role models of saying no.
Right.
We are allowed to say no. And the story of Lilith too is like, it's problematic because it lays out, look what happened when she said no.
Right.
And so we want a different story for us. We don't want to be demonized for our anger, for our righteous anger. And there's a kernel in there. There are a couple of things in there that I'm curious about. Like I'm thinking a lot lately about the stories, our legacies, our spiritual legacies, and what we were raised with, and the imaginings of the storytellers of the past, and how we've inherited those stories, and what happens if we synthesize them and retell them for our time with maybe different endings. So that's one piece of like, what would Lilith's story be today if we could tell it through through the feminist lens that she seeded. So that's like one piece, is I don't want her to be demonized. I want her to say no and sprout wings and fly and land in a space where she is surrounded by people who welcome her in her sovereignty.
Right.
Who welcome her in her sovereignty.
Right. And we have this, these kinds of stories did start in the 70s with Judith Plaskow's wonderful midrash, which first appeared in Woman Spirit Rising, where she makes friends with Eve outside the gates. Once Eve comes into the picture, and she's told terrible things about Lilith, but she walks outside the walls one day and meets her, and they start talking over time and become friends. So instead of competing and setting up women always having to be competitors, they collaborate and are friends and go back arm in arm, ostensibly back into the garden. So Adam knew he'd have something else very different to deal with.
Yeah, but also go back into the garden to bring what they've learned maybe from this experience of collaboration and compassion and connection. And now they bring that into the legacy of the garden. And it wasn't there before. When we take Lilith out of the story, as the rabbis put her in, but when we take her out of the story, look at the legacy that comes from just Adam and Eve. You have Cain and Abel. Like the competition is part of the legacy. The competition is part of the legacy that's built into the biblical tradition.
And women are still demonized, but for something else. When I wrote my first paper on Lilith, I also, of course, talked about Eve and how she also was punished for simply being curious.
For having desire.
Right. And then being responsible supposedly for the fall of humankind, for pain in childbirth, for menstruation, and being expelled, of course, from supposed paradise.
Right, for tempting Adam. And look at what's being set up here. Like, this man is not capable of making decisions for himself, of having boundaries and making good choices that are aligned with his values, supposedly. If he felt like it was wrong to eat the fruit, he should not have eaten the fruit.
Exactly.
And they give Eve so much power is given to Eve for coercing him in some way. Or, what I like to think about, and I'm not the only one, I mean, there are many others who talk about that moment as being a necessary moment of evolution in our story, and that desire was divine. And the result... Oh no, I see that my connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
Many of the paintings you see, she looks very passive. And so it's funny to me, ironic, not funny, but that she is then temptation. There's also, some versions of the story that say the serpent told both of them, or God rather, told both of them not to, take the apple. So he could have said no, as you say. Yeah.
Right. And then yes, you're right. She also gets demonized and blamed for everything that comes next. But I love the thinking of like, this was the birth of free will. And it was a necessary moment in evolution, and they both chose, but she got blamed. And what if we take the blame out and say they were born from the garden to create something new? And every time in the story there's an expulsion, it's also a birthing. And how like the one who is tuned into the need for something different can be credited with that birthing, with the midwifing or the birthing, rather than blamed for the change. Oh, you can't hear me?
Now I can, but we lost a few sentences there. So we've resumed recording. So yeah, you want to rephrase your question about the sacred piece.
Yeah, so we went off in a whole different
We
direction.
did.
Another day we'll come back to. But yeah, we wanted to come back to the question of sacred fire versus Lilith fire and why the gendered differentiation.
I think sacred fire feels broader to me. Again, that's because of my own work over the last 25 years or so with her, and what drew me to her and electrified me about her and her qualities, and those were in me as a woman, relating to a female archetype. And so that, and then teaching it and working with that imagery and that archetype with women over the years in circle and so on. As of course I'm doing now in Lilith's Fire Circle, and as we do sometimes here. Sacred fire is more universal term, I guess, to me. It's a part of probably every religious or spiritual tradition that I know in different ways. It invokes the presence of deity to light the flame. And it's broader, you know what I mean? So for me, Lilith's fire means specifically, I guess, those traits that she embodies. And the
traits that she embodies as a model, especially for women. And I think that that's valid. Like, we are allowed to have,
right.
I mean, this is something that, is really up, right? Is like, what's the difference between a women's space and an all gendered space, or a women's space and a marginalized gender space? And like, why do we need to have gendered spaces? And
right.
Why do we need to have gendered possibility models? And can't everything be for everyone? And
maybe if we get rid of patriarchy, but not right now.
Yeah, and white supremacy too, right? Because there's constant appropriation across cultures and appropriation.
Completely linked, I think.
Yes, yeah, I think so too. So, I'm just sitting with it, and there's a part of me that feels uncomfortable about claiming her just for women and folks of marginalized genders. But then there's another part of me that says we are allowed to have our spaces and our models as women, and especially because we've spent most of civilization not having them, at least in the white context, in the non-matriarchal context.
We know, right.
Right. And so it feels really important. We're not done learning how to have our own space and healing from the ways that we were dominated. And that's the story of Lilith. Is she said, you're not going to dominate me.
Right.
And so to have that model now, thankfully, since like rising since the 70s in this particular way, where she's not just demonized, but held up for us as a feminist possibility model, that's not a lot of time in the course of all time.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, though, I think it's like, there's a question of, can men be feminists? And some people feel strongly no, and some say yes, they can, but they can be pro-feminist, and some feel yes, they can be feminist. I think anybody who feels called and moved by the concept of her fire should embrace it and study it and live it. So I wouldn't, in that way, I wouldn't limit it. It's not my work, but absolutely, anyone who feels that it speaks to them, her energies and her attributes, I want whatever uplifts people, whatever empowers us as human beings to claim our voice. It really comes to that.
And what ignites us.
Right. And women are my top priority, but it doesn't mean I want to shut anyone out, for sure.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a great distinction. Also, I've heard you say a few times today, right? Like women are your focus, women are your top priority. That's where your work is, where your scholarship is, where your support work is, and who you are. That's your heart and your heart, body, soul, mind, everything. And I appreciate, the truth is I mostly work with women too. Right. And I'm in this constant sort of questioning around, like I can also work with people of other genders, and I often work with trans folks. And still, like, my fire or my access to Lilith's fire feels definitely connected to women. Yeah. And that in today's context where we want to explicitly be making space and offering support, especially to folks of other marginalized genders, so the non-binary and trans folks, and and other, right, like those on the gender spectrum who are not cis men. It feels, it's an interest. I noticed in myself like a tension and a wrestling with wanting to be inclusive and also feeling a need to hold a space for women.
Yeah.
So I was not where I expected our conversation to go at all. I think it's interesting, and I love hearing you talk about Lilith and talking about Lilith's fire and talking about the ways she moves and that fire moves through you. I think it's very generative.
Yeah, it's fun to revisit, how I got here, and how I first greeted her and how she first greeted me.
Yeah. And is there anything else you want to add, in her name as we get ready to sign off for today?
I don't think so. I really appreciate your question of what does the fire even mean, because we take it for granted that we know, and many in the audience may not, or may have their own ideas. And we would love to hear those. As always, we'd love your comments on the YouTube channel. This will be up next week.
Yeah, shortly.
Shortly on our YouTube channel, and we'd love to get your feedback. So thanks for the question.
What does Lilith's fire feel like for you, and how does it move through you? What is it spur? What does it ignite in you?
Right.
Those are some questions.
Yeah.
And if you enjoy these conversations, please like the videos and subscribe, and then you'll find out when we have new ones. And also share. Help us share these questions and wisdom and wonderings with a wider audience. We would love for more people to be able to participate.
Yes, and if you want to know how to reach either of us, I think that's on the YouTube channel, right? Under About. Okay.
About, yeah, exactly. If you go to the About tab in our YouTube channel, you'll find all the things.
Great.
Thank you for us, and until next time.
Until next time. Bye.